All right. Looks like we have some people joining the webinar today. Welcome, welcome, welcome. You know, John, my favorite part about these webinars is just beginning is because everyone's just joining, watching the attendee list jump up. Hello, Michael. It's exciting to see. So for those that have joined and you're in, welcome. I would love to know in the chat if this is the first time you've been to a PreSales Collective webinar. And if it's not, how many times have you been to a PreSales Collective webinar? Let's get the chat going today. Thanks, John. Welcome. A couple first timers. Nice. Been to a few, busy year. Ain't that the truth? Number of third, fourth, first timers. Love the first timers. Welcome to the first timers. John, I still see the attending numbers jumping up a little bit, so we'll give it a couple more.
We'll give it a sec, yeah.
David, there's not a frequent flyer program yet, but I would love to start one. I would love to start one. Nice.
Too many to count.
Too many to count. That's good. First live, plenty of recordings. Love that. Love that. No, that's great. We'll go ahead and get started here in just a minute. I'm also curious, where's everybody dialing in from? Let us know where you're from. Chicago, Philly, Dublin, UK. Woo! France, we got a global presence today. Copenhagen,
yeah.
Texas, Madison, New York, South Africa, Austin, Brazil.
Shout out to Farmland America. I just saw that one tick by. I just moved there myself.
You did. You absolutely did. By the way, folks, for those who don't know, for whatever reason for Zoom, it takes a couple minutes for people to come in. So we're just watching the attendees come in. We want to go ahead and get started for a second. But great to see the representation from all over the place. It's fantastic. John, I think we can go ahead and get started. And for those that are still joining us, they'll be trickling in over the next few minutes. So welcome everybody to the PreSales Collective webinar. I'm James Kaikis, co-founder of the PreSales Collective, and I'm joined here by John Cook. John, why don't you introduce yourself?
You bet. My name is John, and I am the Senior Marketing Manager for Consensus, and Consensus serves the pre-sales community with interactive video demos for pre-sales, doing vision building demos and kind of those educational demos. I'm the author of the study that we're going to be doing, and I've got the data to hand, so we'll try and give you as many insights as we can.
Thanks, John. Appreciate it. And you know, the topic of today's webinar is compensation and benchmark study, and the results are in. So as John mentioned, Consensus did a phenomenal report last year evaluating compensation and benchmarks. And this year, PreSales Collective worked with Consensus to help drive more responses and get a little bit more of a global audience. And so what we're going to do today is go through that. Now, what is going to be different about today is that John has the study and I have a lot of questions. And also what we did is with the PreSales Collective, when you signed up on Luma for a while there, I mandated questions. So I've got about 250 questions from folks that filled this out. For those who put out a dot, I totally respect it. But I got a lot of questions too. And so what we're going to do is make this a very interactive session. And so John and I have taken a couple of sections of the study that we believe are most important for the audience. John will present through some of them, and then I have some questions from the list. We'll also take questions in the Q&A and have a live discussion. Let's talk about the results. Before we get in there, I do want to thank everyone for being here today, whether it's your first time, many time, or you've watched a number of our webinars on demand. It's been an amazing journey to see where PreSales Collective is today. And we can't be there without all of you, all of your attendance, insights. Those are super active and engaged, writing. It's amazing. So thank you for being here today. Now, how we make the most out of today's webinar is really being active. Be active in the chat, be active in Q&A. Let's make sure that this is interactive. And as we do that, I want to know, what is your role? We'd like to understand who our audience is today. And so you should have a pop-up in terms of which option best describes your role. Doesn't look like we have any account executives or sales leaders here today. We have some other interested in pre-sales and a pretty even split between individual contributor and IC leader. All right, I'm going to go ahead and end the poll. And John, let's get started. I think to baseline for everybody here today, I want to go through some of the report specifics, right? So let's talk about some of these specifics to baseline, and then we'll start going into the sections. So I'll hand it over to you, John.
All right. So let's just talk a little bit about the survey. So this is the second year that we've done this survey and report. We get respondents from all over the country, all over the world. You can see kind of by the density of the blue, kind of how many from each area. The top 3 areas that we get responses from is likely, probably intuitive, is going to be the U.S., Great Britain, and Europe in general. And I'll say a little bit about why we separate those. It's actually because of the currency that they use, but it looks like my volume's a little low. We'll try and boost that a little bit. But yeah, so all over the world, and that really helps us when we are trying to segment the data, because we can get statistically significant data with smaller segments. So that's a help. If we could jump to the next one, you can see that we had over 1,000 participants this year, more than double what we had last year. That's super exciting, and we expect to see that kind of grow as we gain momentum year after year. 53 countries, you can see a few of them listed there. Let's go ahead and jump forward, and we've got just a little bit about the demographics. Okay, so it's vast majority is software. Not everybody who responded is software. We've also got some hardware in there, some hardware software combos, a little bit of professional services. What we found last year and this year is that the numbers don't change super significantly between those segments. So we decided to kind of keep those all lumped in together as we chart the data. So as far as role segments, right? So we split it up into individual contributors. We call those practitioners in the segment, and oops, that says practitioner, and that's my fault. And leaders. So anybody manager level and above is what we counted as a leader for the purposes of the segmentation. And pre-sales, sales engineers, senior sales engineers, principal sales engineers, all of those people who are doing individual contributions, we lump those together into the practitioner segment. As far as organization size, you can see the breakdown here. It's pretty diverse. We do have the ability to kind of chop up some of the data by organization size, and we'll do a little bit of that in a while. But you can see what the distribution looks like there as well.
Shall we get started, John?
Let's do it. Lay it on me.
All right. So for those here, we're going to break this into a couple of sections, right? We're going to talk about the compensation metrics. We're going to talk a little bit about work-life integration. We're going to talk about pre-sale specific activities, and then throw a couple of items in there like the shift in the pre-sales world, quotas. And so as questions come in, we'll stay a little bit longer in each section. So I anticipate this will be a bit of a longer section. So again, feel free to use the chat, feel free to ask questions, and we'll go through those. So John, let's start with compensation specifics.
Sounds good. All right. The first thing I want to get out of the way here is how we split this up. First of all, the first thing to understand is that all of these numbers are in US dollars. We asked everybody to report their numbers only in USD. Oops, nope. Out we go. Sorry, everybody. I've got kids. Somebody asked me, just as a quick break, somebody asked in the chat why I have an aviation headset on. These are designed to drown out helicopter noise. I have kids, helicopter noise, kids. It seemed like the obvious choice there. It actually has a really good noise canceling microphone on it, which is why we use them a lot and consensus. Somebody mentioned John Care has the same ones. We take credit for that. We totally converted John Care to these headsets, and they're fantastic. So highly recommend. Anyway, back to compensation. So all of these numbers are in USD. However, you'll see down at the bottom that we're segmenting the data by currency. So why is that if they're all in USD? Well, it's because as we look at regions and how compensation differs by region, what seems to be the biggest determining factor on whether somebody gets whether a region gets more or less compensation is the strength of the individual currency. So, for instance, if I showed all of the compensation for North America, that would be Canada, the United States, and Mexico. If I showed all of the compensation for Europe, that would be people who get paid in euros and people who get paid in other currencies other than euros. And that difference tends to skew the data. So we are grouping the results by the currency in the home country of the respondent, if that makes sense. So everybody who gets paid in USD, we grouped them together. Everybody who gets paid in euros, we grouped them together. Everybody who gets paid in pounds sterling and Canadian dollars, Australian dollars, and Indian rupees, and so on. So and these are just the top 5, not as far as compensation, but as far as the number of respondents. So with that out of the way, I hope that's fairly clear, and if it's not, I'm happy to reiterate if somebody's still confused. But without further ado, let's get into it. So you can see here what our median compensation is as far as base salary for practitioners. All right. So and there's some fairly consistent numbers that we come across here. And they mirror, by the way, much of the data that we had from the last year. Last year, we grouped by geographic region as opposed to by currency, so we can't do necessarily changes from last year to this year and show what the difference is super accurately, but it's pretty close anyway. The numbers are very consistent, which is if you're doing a statistical analysis, consistent data is a happy confirmation. So it kind of validated some of the data that we had last year as well. Any questions for me on this, James? Or any questions?
Yeah, we have a couple questions. One, someone wants to know what is the name of your headset, but we can close that at the end. But have we also adjusted data for seniority and/or experience?
We can segment by experience. Interestingly, and I can slice some of that data in a little bit. I can tell you broadly what we observe as far as experience. What we observe is that there's a steep climb, as you would expect, in practitioners specifically. There's a climb from 1 to 4 years of experience into the 5 to 8 year range. You can expect to see a steady climb up in compensation. After the 8 year range, the median, now this is, once again, we're talking median here, just kind of levels off. So if you're going to stay as a practitioner in pre-sales after the 8 year range, we don't see a huge increase or decrease in level of compensation after 8 years of experience. And we can look at what those specifics are in a little bit if you'd like. But yeah, so that's the general trend that we would see. Now, once more, obviously there are outliers, and anybody who this is not intended to be a prediction for anybody's career. This is simply the environment in which we're all working, right? So outliers, anybody who people are achieving, people are breaking this mold and they're sitting at one end of the curve, and some people are at the other end of the curve. Obviously, that's why there's a curve. But this is just intended to kind of outline the environment that we're working in.
John, I'm answering some questions in the chat as well, but just looking at this first page, I have had a couple questions say, does this mean UK SEs are being paid less than US SEs?
The median salary, yes, in Great Britain, in US dollars, because that's what we asked everybody to report in, is less than the median salary for SEs in the US. That is exactly what that means.
John, let's go through these first 4 slides and then we'll go through questions. We can always come back to this. So,
You bet.
ready for the next slide?
Yep, let's go. Are we?
Is it working, John?
Nope, I'm still seeing the same slide. Anybody? Oh, let's see. Practitioner OTE. Okay, yeah, we're there. Got it. So on target earnings. So what we asked in the question was assume that you hit quota. So that any variable compensation that you have as part of your compensation, assume that you hit quota, or if you have, for instance, a high, medium, and low target, assume you hit your mid target. All right, that's what we asked in the actual question. So on target earnings, USD 170, 120 for Euro, 131 for Great Britain, and then 97 for Canada, 176 for Australia, and 31 for Indian rupees. So once again, we split Europe and Great Britain only because they use different currencies. That's the only reason that those guys are separated out. We do see a consistent difference between Europe and Great Britain on OTE of about 10 to 15,000, which is interesting because from what I can see, median wages are not that's not. You can't just chalk that up to do people who get paid in pounds generally get paid more than people who get paid in euros? It doesn't seem to be the case. So this actually bucks the trend a little bit as far as the difference between Great Britain and or the UK and Europe in general.
John, a quick question here is
Yep.
Someone asked about base salary and or OT. Does this include any static amounts like car allowances or anything along those lines?
Nope. We just asked, the questions we asked were specifically salary and then variable compensation. We kind of limited it to just those two aspects. So there are absolutely ancillary benefits that may modify overall compensation. We do ask about stock options later on in the survey and that sort of thing, but these are the broad strokes of the compensation. So
we'll move on to the leaders and then we'll come back to both of these slides. So
great. All right. So once again, this is for leadership. This is manager level and above. You can see base salary across all of these with 169.5 in the US, 136 Great Britain. Once again, we see that, roughly, I guess that's closer to 20,000 difference between Great Britain and Europe, and then Canada and Australia over there on the far right. With Australia, I'm not sure exactly what the what they seem on base salary. They report just slightly higher than US. Not sure if that's correlation, causation, things there. Maybe it's just a matter of once you hit a certain level, everybody moves to Australia just because you can. But I wouldn't mind myself. And on target earnings. So once again, if you're hitting your targets or you're hitting quota, or if you have just a single target, or if you have a range of targets, this is mid-level. You can see what those distributions look like there. These are similar. They line up pretty similarly to last year's results. Once again, we measured it a little bit differently. We grouped a little bit differently last year, but just in broad strokes, these line up pretty consistently. Not a huge difference between last year and this year as far as what's happening in compensation.
Thanks, John. Let's take a pause here because there's definitely some questions that we have. In terms of the response numbers across these, do you have a breakdown in terms of geographical or country response?
Yeah, you bet. Let me just
maybe we could focus either on general or IC first. And just so everyone knows, John has the data on his computer, and I told him we were going to ask some questions, and he's going to slice and dice live.
That's right. I'm going to do my best. All right. So when it comes to responses here. If we're looking at, let's see, if we're looking at, let's just say leaders, I can tell you that the number of responses we're looking at, oh, hold on a second. Let me just make sure that I've got this all right. So let's talk about leader OTE for a minute. We're looking at they're statistically significant across the entire board, but looking at 235 responses in the U.S., getting down to 53, 51 responses in UK and Europe, and then going on from there. So that's kind of the level that you can expect in these different areas. If you want to get into something like Canada or India, those we don't have quite so many responses. I think we have like 25 responses in Australia, so we're just climbing up to that level of statistical significance there. But the rest of them, we can construct a pretty reliable confidence interval. So,
thanks, John. And so, on the fly, really, I am curious your thoughts on how base salary for individual contributor solutions engineers vary from small companies, maybe under 3,000 versus large companies. Because I think that's what I saw a lot in the questions is people were asking for really the differences between how these companies pay out.
Absolutely. So let's see. In broad strokes, by company size, we see the biggest, anybody at 150 employees or below, the median that we see for those is 138,500 for the median OTE. Okay, and this is we're talking about practitioners only right now. We don't. This isn't for leaders. So 138,500 is the median OTE if for organizations 150 employees or less. Okay. Between 150 and 3,000, that jumps to 154. Okay, so that's the biggest jump that we see is jumping between 150 and 3,000 employees. I realize that's a broad range in there, but the difference is only half that when you get above 3,000 employees. So if you look at everybody above 3,000, everybody who works for organizations above 3,000 employees, the median there is 160,000. Also, somebody asked if we have the mean data versus the median. I do, and you'll be able to see that in the report when you download the report. I don't have all of it to hand. I usually quote median because it's more resistant to outliers as far as, if there, because you get outliers in either situation, and sometimes the farther out those outliers are, the more it'll skew the mean as opposed to the median. Anyway, geeking out on stats talk here, but that's why I quote the median most often, is because it gives you the middle of the road answer. So yeah. So in answer to your question, though, 150 employees less, 138,500. We have a jump of a good 15,000. A little bit over 15,000 once you get above 150 employees, and once you get above 3,000 employees, you'll jump another chunk, but maybe half of what you jump between 150 and 3,000.
John, thanks for that. Is there a way to break that down by years of experience as well? Is that broken down in those numbers as well?
I don't have that breakdown. I can give you the trend though. So, and let's see if I can.
But I appreciate everyone. I love the questions going on right now. This is fantastic.
Yeah, it's awesome. So sales, if we're talking about just practitioners, okay? And then rather than going into years of experience in each of those segments, because that'll take us a little while, why don't I give you what the trend line, and I'm not sure if we discussed this already, but when you, the way the trend lines look for years of experience is that in years 1 through 4, you have, in years 1 through 4, let me back up. Once you get above 4 years, you'll see a big jump. People who are the average for people who have 1 to 4 years of experience is significantly less than people who have 4 to 8 years of experience. However, once you get above 8 years of experience, it levels off. So, so for instance, if we look at James, give me just a second, and I will pull up exactly what those numbers look like.
Right.
And so for practitioner compensation, you're looking at a difference of the median compensation. This is right now we're just looking at in order to get to kind of homogenize the data a little bit. I'm only looking at US people who are paid in USD, pound sterling, and euros. Just FYI. And then we're looking at practitioners, and if we look at people who have 4 years of experience or less, the mean, sorry, we'll quote the mean on this one is 138,000. And then for people who have 5 to 8 years of experience, the mean is like 168,000. So there's a bigger jump there. And then, but then if you count people who are over that, it levels off. So you don't see a difference of more than maybe $6,000 all told in that.
Great. Appreciate that, John. That's
yeah, you bet.
Yeah, I appreciate the questions that are coming through. We're going to continue on to the next section. We'll have some time at the end to potentially come back to OTs. We just want to spend a quick minute on this next section around work-life balance, work-life integration, whatever you want to call this. John, you want to walk us through these next couple slides?
You bet. So we just wanted to, part of our study is focusing on workload. We talk about AE to SE ratios and things like that. We wanted to look at how at what the work week looks like for leaders and practitioners. So the question here was on average, how many hours per week do you work? You can see what the distribution looks like. The median is 45 hours. People who are working 75 hours on average, I don't know, because they're down there at the right end of that curve, and I don't know what to tell you, man. But that's a heavy average. If that's week after week, I salute you. Hats off to you. But take a vacation. You've earned it. So for practitioners and leaders, the average that's reported is about 5 hours difference. Leaders report an average of 50 hours a week. Now, crunch week, because we all know that there are distributions, right? And we don't always work the average amount. So we asked, what is the maximum number of hours you've worked in a single week or 7-day period over the last 12 months? The median is 60. So it's a pretty heavy week. Some people are once again on the right end of that curve, and it's fairly evenly distributed. It's almost a normal bell curve. So, and if the most you've worked in the last 12 months is 35 hours, I want to know where you guys are, because I want to go work there.
John, appreciate you going through this data. You know, I wanted to show this, right, because I was especially curious, especially around the crunch week components. Do you have any specific high-level thoughts on some of this data? Has it been sliced and diced based off of geo as well?
So that's one of those that it may be in the initial report. There will be subsequent reports that we put out as well that dive into more specific areas. But all I can say on the subject of crunch week is this. Anecdotally, what I'm hearing a lot is that customer interactions are taking longer. That is, demos where a demo might, let me back up. people use the term demo to refer to different things. Okay, in the pre-sales community, sometimes they're talking about an initial, what we often call harbor tour demos. Sometimes they're talking about. Sometimes people refer to the POCs as a demo, depending on what that POC looks like. I was talking to. I've spoken to some leaders who said that what they used to call a demo that took maybe 2 hours in the past, now they have instances where it's taking 2 days, sometimes 3 days, as solutions expand. As that happens, more and more is required of the pre-sales teams, and I don't want to sound obvious here, but that's one of the things contributing to that. There are other things that are contributing to longer hours and longer work weeks. One of them is that pre-sales, we talk about the rise of pre-sales, kind of what's happening this year. You guys are a big part of that with the PreSales Collective, their community, your community springing up, and there's a lot of buzz around different, the need for community in the pre-sales world. There are tools that are coming up. The amount of capitalization of pre-sales tools is amazing. A lot of that reflects, in my opinion, that pre-sales motions, the activities that pre-sales engages in, most closely reflect how buyers want to buy. And we do know that while pre-sales, I just had a conversation the other day with Peter Cohen about this. He was talking about how pre-sales, the role of pre-sales, the pre-sales role itself has changed hardly at all in about 35 years that he's been doing it, right? And right down to the conversation about pre-sales getting a seat at the table that we hear a lot, right? That's the same conversation that's been happening, according to Peter, for all that time. What is changing is buyer expectations and buyer behaviors. And we see that morphing almost on an annual basis. But what we're seeing in the pre-sales world is that, and in the B2B world, we've already seen this in the B2C, in the consumer behavior, okay? But it's now extending into how people want to buy B2B software. The pre-sales motions most closely reflect how they want to buy. They're becoming less tolerant of my job, marketing, right? They're becoming less tolerant of the content that is typically considered marketing content, high level sizzle content, that sort of thing. And they are becoming more, they're demanding more of the brass tacks content, which is what pre-sales creates. So I give that as my opinion as to one of the reasons that we're seeing crunch weeks extending and more required of pre-sales teams in that regard.
Yeah, thanks for that, John. And Dave Maloof asked a good question around workload year over year, right? So what are these numbers? Do you have the numbers of?
We didn't ask last year.
You didn't ask last year.
We didn't ask last year. No, sorry. So next year, stay tuned for next year, and we'll be able to show you a trend.
Because he makes a really good point about, there's no travel, right? So, a lot of us were still doing 40, 50, 60 hours with travel, and now there's no travel, and these numbers could be still similar. The idea of always being on, cramming meetings in, it is very interesting. And Juan asked a good question, John.
That's a great point.
Around hours worked based off size of company. Do you have that data slice?
That's interesting.
We hear so many times that, you're in a startup, you have to work all these crazy hours, but let's actually see what it looks like with your data.
Let's see. That'll take me a second. If you want to, we can.
Yeah, no problem. Take your time.
All right.
Again, we want to do live conversations. So we appreciate everyone asking the questions in the chat, having some good conversations as well. Very interesting for sure.
Let's see. All right. So we confine this to sales engineers, to practitioners only?
Yes.
All right. And we'll make sure that we take off some of these others. All right. So let's talk about up to 150 employees first. That looks like it may be, that looks slightly less. I'm looking at the distribution. I don't have the median immediately to hand, but the distribution looks slightly less than, well, let me just, let's look at it compared to our 150 to 3,000. And yeah, it's definitely higher, but only by about 5 hours on average between 150 and below and 150 to 3 or 151 to 3,000, I guess. So, and then if we're looking at large enterprise, over 3,000, that drops back down actually. So it looks like the mid-market pre-sales teams are experiencing the biggest crunch times as far as crunch weeks go. Not average, but as far as crunch weeks go.
Great. Thanks for that, John. Let's go to this next section, which is pre-sale specific activities.
All right. So we asked which key activities, and you could select a maximum of 4 activities. So you could multi-select here. Okay. Which key activities would have the greatest impact on your success if you or your team, if you're a leader, could spend more time executing them? What we're looking for here is which activities move the needle most, right? Pre-sales has a lot of different things required of them, and they don't always get to spend their time on the activities that maybe pre-sales recognizes to be the most high leverage activities, because there are other activities that are simply part of the sales cycle that you can't get away from. Harbor tour demos is one that comes to mind, right? With all of the kind of the unqualified demos that we know to be part of those, right? When you're doing a demo for somebody who's not in a buying cycle. So what was interesting to me is that the number 1 response is discovery, which says to me that if this is pre-sales team saying the biggest way to move the needle is by doing better, deeper discovery. And my immediate question is, what's stopping us from doing better, deeper discovery? And there, I had a couple of thoughts, and I'd be interested to know what all of you think. But things that I'm observing are, as customers come to interactions better educated, we know that we as sales teams, sales pre-sales combo teams, we get much less of the customer's time as a percentage of their total buying cycle than we did in the past. I think the number is, according to Gartner, customers spend, or prospects who are in a buying cycle, spend about 17% of their buying cycle, right? When they're actually doing their research and they're in a buying mode, they only spend about 17% of their time with vendors. If they're looking at 3 vendors, you get maybe 5-6%, right, of their buying cycle time if you're one of those vendors. And so as they come better educated to those interactions, are they writing their own prescriptions rather than are they less tolerant of discovery, for instance? We know that we have to earn discovery, right? This is something that I hear a lot of our pre-sales coaches talk about, is that discovery questions have to be earned. You can't just launch into, asking questions before you give to give a look and start giving information to the prospect. But is that one of the things that's contributing to this? What are the activities that are standing in the way of this discovery? I mentioned harbor tour demos and unqualified demos. You'll notice that intro demos, what we might call harbor tour demos, are way down there at the bottom, right? Not many people think that that's going to really move the needle if they do more of those, largely because if you look at elsewhere in the survey, the median response on how many of those are unqualified is 30%. 50% is not uncommon at all, right? And so if a third of all of those intro demos are not even valid opportunities, there's no way they're going into a buying cycle, that's not the place to spend our time. I was interested. I would have thought that planning and architecting, maybe technical demos, might be higher on that list, but discovery number 1. So that was a surprise to me.
Yeah, thanks for that, John. I'm enjoying reading the chat right now. There's a lot of thoughts here around discovery. And there are a lot of thoughts on individuals saying that their company have AEs doing disco or even skipping disco in transactional
I was
models.
wondering about that. Yeah. Are we offloading discovery? Because pre-sales discovery is a different thing, right? It's not banned. And
Right.
so if we're offloading that and the AE teams are saying, hey, I did the discovery, over to you now. And honestly, I hear that refrain a lot, that it's a very different thing. And so
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, right? And reading through the chat, because I think we've got a couple dozen people weighing in on this, which I appreciate. I definitely understand, AE discovery, right? On, like you said, BANT or sales criteria, whether it's AE or BDR, but there has to be a level of technical discovery, right? There has to be a level of use case discovery from an SC team, but so many people don't want to do it. And to your point on shifting buyer expectations, if someone inbound, and then they talk to an SDR, then they talk to an AE, and then they talk to an SE, and then they get a demo. That's an intense process, but
it's a long chain, and it frankly sucks as a buyer.
But it's the process I would say a lot of companies currently have, right? You currently have to go through a lot of things to even get to the product, right? But
by the time they get to the AE, to the SE, now the SE wants to ask them a long string of questions that are necessary questions in order to give them the right prospect, but they are so intolerant that I would be intolerant of it, right? I don't want to look. I went through a lot of hoops to get here. Just show me what I want to see.
Yeah, and I think this is why though it's so interesting to see like this product-led sales and product-led growth motion and like people getting into the products a little bit easier and what that means. Some people have said, hey, I don't have time to get on discos. I agree. When your ratio is 1-4, 1-5, 1-7, how do you expect to actually be involved in discovery to get what you need, right? But then, like to your point, the buyer expectations are, hey, I need to get in. I want to see this product. I reached out. I want to see this product. Show me something. But if I'm the SC and I'm being told, hey, just do, the harbor cruise or the point and click demo, if I don't do something that's going to resonate with this customer, then I've essentially missed my shot, right? And I mean, I think this is why I think companies are trying to figure this out. And to your point, it's sales motions versus buyer motions. And I think that is, John, we've talked about this. I've talked about this, Garen. I think that is what's shifting and changing. But our organizations need to figure this out. And some organizations say, oh, we got to do, 5 discos before we show them anything. And that's fine. But sure. If that's what your buying process is, I get it. But if your competitors got a similar product and they've got their individuals in there, you know what I mean? That buying process and that frictionless process plays a factor. I got a lot of comments on this. We could talk all day. I'm gonna move on though. I'm gonna move on to the next slide because I think the next slide is really interesting too. I got a lot of questions in the chat and the Q&A on things like KPIs, right? Or ratios. And I thought this was really interesting. So do you mind breaking down this KPI question?
Not at all. Okay, so it was pretty simple question. It was a multi-select. You could select as many as applied. What key performance indicators are used to judge your performance? And this comes down to the question that we discussed the other day, right? What constitutes, and I'm fascinated by this. This is something that I really want to understand better. What constitutes a high-performing pre-sales team? Is it simply ARR? Is it, is it anecdotal? This is their whole industries, whole tools are springing up around this question of what constitutes a high performance pre-sales team. Is it what role does ratio play in that? I know some pretty dynamite pre-sales teams that are working at like a 15-to-1 ratio. It's madness, and yet they're for whatever reason, for the products that they're servicing and so on, it's working for them. But it's crazy to me. So is it demo, POC activities, et cetera? But you can see the frequency with which each of these is cited as a KPI. This year, I will say, and maybe it might have had to do with the way we asked it, because we asked it slightly differently. We just left it as a free form answer last year, and we tried to just kind of bucket them and parse them afterwards. This year, we offered a list along with another option that people could enter in. And one of the things that I did see less of this year is the none. My performance is not measured. That was way higher on the list last year. But you'll see that people are still quite high on the list. Is the technical win? People are carrying quota in sales engineering, which is not something that we typically think of when we think of sales engineering. Percent of deals won, lost, feedback from customers. Like I said, the technical win is still in there. I know that there are some coaches who were like, "That's kill that, get that out of there." But product knowledge and certifications are up there as well, and peer review. And then some people are also measured on average deal size and stage movement and that kind of thing as well.
Yeah.
But any thoughts on like? I bet there are lots of thoughts on this.
There are lots of thoughts. I've got a couple already, because I reached out in the chat and said, none, my performance is not measured. And a couple people actually respond back to me that says that's how I'm compensated. And they told me that they're only base salary, right? They don't actually have a variable in terms of that. Todd Jansen said, crazy to see sales cycle duration so low. I would say that I'm surprised, but I'm not surprised on feedback from sales being number 2, because I want to know, and maybe people can put this in the chat, like, how is that measured within your organization? Is it a survey? Is it hey, fingers in the air, like, oh yeah, they're saying you're giving a great job. Yep. Seeing some people say it's so subjective. Yep. I mean, this is what's tough, right? So
yeah, it really is, because that question, what constitutes a high performance pre-sales team, is something that leaders are asking all over the place. And as pre-sales changes, let me back up. So pre-sales may not have changed significantly over as far as the role goes over the last 35 years. But our expectation, every other role has changed. And so what we're seeing, I think, is that pre-sales, we need to get a handle on this in order to understand it better, because it's such a pain point for organizations to manage this well.
Yep. Agreed. John, I want to continue talking through this section, but I want to get through to our last section. So real quick though, for everyone, quota or not quota, 32% of individuals did say that they carry a quota for 67. And John, just quickly, if people carry a quota, do they have higher OTE as an
25 grand, 25,000 on average is the difference between carrying a quota and not carrying a quota.
All right. Thank you for that. And I just want to get to this last section of the shift in the pre-sale world. And I'm curious on the chat. So for those, I have a WTF, 68% do not carry quota. So it's interesting, right? So I will say for this conversation, appreciate everyone being active. We're going to save the chat. We're going to save the Q&A. John's also getting the list of all the questions that I've received, and we're going to figure out a little bit of a next step to continue on. Not only will a next step be that you'll be able to sign up to get the complete report once it's done from John, but we'll continue to figure out what medium to continue these conversations, because these are a hot topic with everyone. So yep, there is. I just love the chat. This chat is fantastic today. So John, just real quick, can you break this down in terms of these last couple of components when we talk about the pre-sales influence and the shift that's happening?
Yeah, you bet. So let's jump back one, if you would.
So I got 2 screens up. We should be on pre-sales influence, median 5.
Okay, great. So on a scale of 1 to 10, 5 being equal to sales, how much influence and recognition does pre-sales have within your organization? I did not expect to see so many above 5, and there's quite a lot. And the median sits right there at about the same level of influence as sales, which is fantastic to see. Anecdotally, that's not usually what I hear, but it's a great mark that that pre-sales has more of a seat at the table oftentimes than we might think they have. All right, now let's talk about versus a year ago. Does pre-sales have more or less influence at your organization compared to 1 year ago? And this is indicative of the kind of the thing that we're all sort of feeling and intuiting, right? Which is that the vast majority, over 87% of responses indicate that it's either the same or more than last year. Very, very small percentage are reporting that the influence of pre-sales is declining in their organization. And I think that that trend is only going to continue to rise. Like I say, mostly buyer driven, because the purchasing process, we can blame Amazon, we can blame Spotify, we can blame, whoever we want to blame for consumers getting to buy really, really easily now. But when it comes to B2B software, it's still a really fraught process. So as that, I know from myself, when I'm buying software, if I could go straight to pre-sales, would I not do it? Would I ever not go straight to pre-sales? When buying software, I mean, why do I want to talk to anybody else? So sorry if there are any AEs out there that are hating me now, but but as a buyer, you want to talk to the person who knows, and you want to talk to the person, I mean, preferably who's not necessarily carrying the quota as well, right? I mean, there's a thing there. So
yeah, John, I will say one thing here. I think it does go to show that if you have a strong account executive who can really carry their weight or carry the sales cycle or build trust and continuity, it allows for a better co-selling experience between your account executive and your sales engineer.
It's way better.
And it is very interesting. I'm seeing a lot of comments here on this, but I want to ask, because we'll only have time for maybe one more question. Was there any qualitative data on these questions?
No, this was just our first pass at this. So we're just kind of getting the overall vibe of how people perceive pre-sales influence in the org. So not anything really more nuanced than that, I'm afraid.
Appreciate it. John, one last question, because I did see a reminder, something I saw earlier. Is this broken down by gender at all, or ethnicity in the results?
I don't know why the heck I didn't ask that, but I didn't ask it. I didn't ask about gender or age. And I think that's huge. It's something that I'm super curious about. Like, I want to see what the split looks like.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that, John. I think, we need to continue to have these conversations. It's great to see that, the report went from 340 to over 1,000, but I'm really looking forward to seeing this report at 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 over the next year or two, and it can really slice and dice that data. Someone's asked me if I will ask a question. Asking, ethnicity or different items like that. Well, I think we should, really continue to hone in on some of those so we can break this down. Because it just seems that compensation with pre-sales professionals just tends to be this unknown. It seems to be all over the place. Whether you talk to individual contributors or leaders at all these different companies, everyone's got a little bit different of a say on it. And I think that's okay, but it'd be great to be able to have some sort of benchmarks out there and some sort of
context, right? So we know the field that we're playing on.
Exactly. And that's why I appreciate everyone being here today and all the chat and the Q&A. We'll continue the conversation. That was the intent of this. And John, appreciate you walking us through this. So just a couple quick announcements from PreSales Collective, and then we'll get out of here for everybody. We'd like to know how we did today. So if you can let us know how we did today, ideally, will we see you at next month's webinar, and are you in the Slack yet? And my ask of you will be that if you have any specific feedback in terms of things that you wanted to hear today, questions that you don't think that we answer, problems that we didn't address, reach out to me in the PreSales Collective Slack. I'll continue to work with John and the Consensus team because I know that they want to make sure that this continues to be the benchmark study that we use around the pre-sales profession. So John, thanks again for your time today.
Hey, it's my pleasure. And just a quick shout out, the link to register for the download, I think you posted it into the chat, right, James?
I did not yet. I'll make sure it's sent on the after of this webinar. So
okay. And also, if you jump to our website, go on consensus.com, and you go to the resources page, it says /resources. You can look at last year's report there, and anybody who's on the last year's report will shoot you a note as well if you want to get this year's. So.
That's great, John. We'll make sure that all of that goes in the post event survey. Just a couple of things for those that are on. PreSales Collective has a lot of events going on. And so if you actually look at our Luma page, lu.ma/PSC, we have a number of webinars that are happening, book club, Women in Solutions Excellence, and also our Leadership Next event on April 7th. We have a conference for aspiring leaders and leaders in their first couple of years in leadership. And then Presales Podcast, 44 episodes so far. We're coming up on a year, which is really crazy to think about. Every Monday, we launch a new episode, and our Slack. I got a couple messages that say, hey, how can I join the Slack? presalescollective.com/Slack. We have actually 4,400 pre-sales professionals in that environment from all over the world. So some really great content, some really great conversations happening, as well as things like virtual coffee to connect you with other pre-sales professionals. And then we have our leadership collective. So for those that are leaders, you have to be a people leader to join, but we do have a private membership group that has additional types of content. You can check that out at presalescollective.com/leaders. And other than that, that's it for us. Give you a couple minutes back in your day, and we'll see you soon. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks all. Next time.